we're such an enthusiastic room. I think we're going to kick off now if everyone's seated and comfortable. First of all, thank you so much. It's really exciting for us to see a really packed out room here this evening. My name's Catherine and I work at WaterAid. WaterAid is a charity that kind of says what it does on the tin. We work on water, sanitation and hygiene in 38 countries in the world. And tonight's a little bit of an experiment for us. We haven't really done an event like this before at this kind of venue, so that's why I was thrilled to see that we were sold out today online and that so many of you have turned up for this evening. We hope that you really enjoy the programme and that it's an interesting and engaging conversation that's going to happen. So tonight has kind of been born out of the Shorts film competition that's been a 2-year film competition that WaterAid has run in partnership with the Public Media Alliance. And I've got Marion in the room from the Public Media Alliance at the back, so she's giving a little wave. And the film competition came about because we wanted to look outside of the organisation and hear stories about water from around the world, not just in the countries that we work in, but also further afield. Find out what excites people about water, what they like doing with water, what concerns people about water, and also how people are tackling the future of water, the global water crisis. What is that in your country, and who is tackling it? Is it individuals? Is it scientists? Is it governments? Let's see who's working on this issue, and let's come together and have a discussion about what's happening. So yeah, we've got a range of films for you this evening, quite different locations. Hopefully we'll see some smiles. You'll learn something, and you'll have fun. Just a bit of housekeeping. If everyone could turn their mobile phones off or onto silent, that would be fantastic. Later on, so we're going to screen the films initially, and then we're going to invite our lovely panel to come and take a seat here. And Mark Galloway from the International Broadcasting Trust, we're going to leave the conversation in his hands, and he will be guiding us through a chat where you guys are just as much involved as our expert panelists here. So we're going to have a hashtag that's going to come up on the screen after the films, Future of Water. So if any of you are on Twitter, please do share your thoughts. And that's partly in kind of the 4 filmmakers. So the 4 films you're going to see this evening have been made by filmmakers who are based in the locations where the films are. So sadly they're not here with us this evening, but it's been a global film competition, and this is still a global event. So we're live streaming now, so hopefully they can all see me on screen. They're all on Twitter, so it would be really great if you think anything about one of the particular films, or you just want to give a comment. I think they would absolutely love that. So their Twitter handles will appear after the film, along with the hashtag. So do get involved in that conversation. And I guess we'll just have a conversation about, how do big topics, big issues like water, how do you kind of grapple with that, and how do we communicate that out to people in a way that engages them and makes them kind of care and listen and think about what that might be. You'll see that these films are all different styles, and so we'll kind of question which audiences might these reach out to, how do you reach audiences, where is the home for this kind of short film. And also we'll be looking a little bit at the innovations and the techniques that come up in the films themselves, so some of the solutions that are posed in the films, and we'll discuss whether we think those are good solutions and what else is being done on this area. So I think that's enough from me. I'm going to kick off and introduce our first film. Now, running order. Is it ATM? Yeah. Okay, so our first film is from the Philippines, and it's been made by Giselle Santos. So she's a filmmaker based out there. She makes a combination of short films, corporate films, and documentaries. She screens in film festivals, and she's really passionate. She's told us that she's learned quite a lot and become really interested in the specifics of what you'll see in her film. And I know she faced quite a few challenges in filming this and just kind of getting out to the remote communities where she was filming, which is something that we certainly resonate with at WaterAid. I work in our film team, and we have that challenge. So it's really great to hear some of her thoughts as well. So yeah, I hope you enjoy her film, ATM, Automatic Tubing Machine.
picturean tayo. Ano muna na ito? Ako na nauna. Ikita pa. Hindi pwede. Sino kami? Huwag mo lang alisin silo. Malami pa. 86. 86. Pesos? 86. Thanks.
If you enjoyed that film from Giselle. I really love that film. I think it's really thought-provoking and just a really nice start to the evening, sets the tone of what we're talking about. So the next film's quite different to that. This is from Vardan Hovhannisyan. Vardan's based in Armenia, and usually he tends to make feature-length documentaries. So he expressed that making a 5-minute film was a challenge for him, but a challenge that he really thrived on. And yeah, it's got a great pace and energy, and I think probably a different way to how you might have seen or heard about an academic project. So yeah, I hope you enjoy this one, Blanketed Snows.
Armenia, high mountains, upland lakes, and fast rivers.
Մեգավոթեկուս շատ մոտ է գտնում Մարագազ լեռան, ստորոտինա, պետքա որ ջուրը բավարարի, բայց ամառվա ընթացքում հուլիսից սկսած շատ քիչ է, շատ դժվար է ջրելը։ Նայեք, այս խնձորի ծառը չի ջրվել, սրանից էլ սենց է։ Այս խնձորը, այս խնձոր պետք է լինի։
Armenia has long been known as a water-rich country, but few realize that today it is suffering from a growing water crisis. Because of climate change, Armenia's weather keeps growing hotter, and the mountain snows which serve as the water supply melt earlier and earlier each year. For many villages, this means floods in the spring and drought in the late summer. But on the slopes of Armenia's tallest mountain, two scientists are leading an experiment that may hold the key to ending the water crisis.
We're trying to level the supply of the water per the demand in that arid months.
So what is their idea? Nothing less than to save the snow on the mountain from melting, tucking it in with blankets of geotextile material, keeping in the cold and protecting the snow from the hot rays of the sun. If the blanketed snow survives until the following winter and is covered with a fresh layer of snow, they theorize that it will meld and compact, transforming into an icy artificial glacier that can survive the summer heat and provide water year-round.
Более естественной идеи, как сохранение того, что нам Бог дает в виде снега, невозможно придумать.
During the summer, the professors return to see the state of their experiment. With the snow gone, they have no choice. They have to walk. So far, so good. But with last winter's snow still on the ground, the experiment's success or failure is still months away. Summer is over, and at this altitude, it means that winter is about to begin. To allow the old and new snow to meld, the blankets must now be removed. After the blankets were removed, Mount Aragats was hit by an unexpected heat wave. The experiment barely survived, but before the last remnants of the previously blanketed snow could melt, the weather cooled and snowfall finally arrived.
В этом году у нас впервые есть настоящий результат. Снег переживает летний период. This experimentation, after all, will be yielding some kind of a system that will provide more water for people.
The experiment on Mount Aragats is only in its infancy, and there is still much work left to do. But if the success continues, then perhaps Armenia's farmers will one day look at their bountiful harvest and think of the miracle of the blanketed snows.
Thanks. So I think you'll agree, a bit of an energetic film there, but really interesting. So thanks for that from Armenia. Next up, we're heading to Sierra Leone, and a young filmmaker called Ibrahim Kamara made this film, The Hoist. And he met Khadija in his local area and was really inspired by her kind of personally just wanting to do something to change the situation in her community. He made this film and really wanted to show other Sierra Leoneans that local Sierra Leoneans can make films and get stories out within their own community, which I think is really nice. We kind of purposely tried to choose films that we could fund of filmmakers based in locations so that we could hear stories being told from them. So yeah, he's made this film, and he was particularly interested in water because a survey came out in Sierra Leone talking about the access levels of water, and he was a passionate guy about it. He's also had some mentoring for this film from one of our generous judges who was involved in selecting the films that made it through to the funding for this competition. So I hope you enjoy The Hoist.
community wherein water is a problem. In fact, water is very expensive. My name is Khadija Darami. I am 19 years old. I am an innovator. I want to help my community. People are suffering in my community. There is no water, and life cannot go on without water. So I sat down, thought about it. How can I help my people? I thought of the lifting. So I decided to create the electric hoist system. Start to draw the plan first, and then put the plan into action. The things I used to make the electric hoist, one is the motor, the switch, the circuits, you have the open and close, the control box, the capacitor, etc., the cables, I use all these things. Some of the things I bought, some from the scrapyard. So going to the scrapyard, it's been challenging because you're a girl, you have to be all classy and all, but you go out there starting to pick things out, like, oh, I need this one, I need this one. But I have to take it, put it inside my bag and go home, try to make things. It's challenging because some of the things you take, oh gosh, you don't want to see them. But they have use, they are important, so you just have to take them. Because are the small one that they look for. This one also. This was my first innovation, but after doing this, it drives me into doing more. Using the electrical system, you just have to turn on your switch and there you go. The rope goes down. It goes down faster because there is no weight acting on it. But then, immediately you feel the weight, then you turn off the switch and then you turn it the other way around and then the rope comes up again. This pump has changed the lives of many people around that have access to it, because now the accidents is limited, you don't hear about accidents and people don't complain pain. And now, like you say, go fetch me water, people, you don't put on faces. They are like, oh yeah, okay, I will, because it is very, very comfortable now, so it's making a change. I love my innovation and I'm very, very happy with it because it's not always solving people's problems, but mine as well.
Okay, so moving on to our last film before we have the panel discussion, we're moving over to South Africa in Cape Town. And the filmmaker Sven Harding, who made this film, actually has submitted twice to the Shorts Film Festival, and this is his second film that we've been featured, so we're really pleased that he's come back to us with another idea. And this film was influenced by American photographer and environmentalist Ansel Adams, and you'll see why, because it kind of references, it's in black and white, and very much Sven wanted to kind of engage the audience with evocative, beautiful, poetic shots. So I hope you enjoy this. I think it's a different take on a very topical subject that's in the news right now. So that's Place of Sweet Waters.
Hydrocide is when a community misuses their water source, so they pollute their water source or send it out into the ocean rather than utilising it. They're basically committing mass suicide because people cannot live where there is no water. Cape Town was settled by Europeans. The indigenous people called the city Kamisa, which means the place of sweet waters, due to the fact that it had this beautiful spring water abundantly available. Table Mountain virtually rises out of the ocean to 1,000 meters above sea level, and any cold front that's moving in from the ocean hits the mountain and causes the rainfall, and that water percolates through the mountain and comes out in the form of springs. The springs of Table Mountain sustained livelihoods and people for centuries. Spring water was used for drinking purposes, it was used for irrigation purposes, it was used for washing. They also became places, though, where slop buckets were poured and people threw their rubbish, and they had become polluted sources rather than a source of life. During British occupation in the 1860s, there was an outbreak of the bubonic plague. They decided that it was caused by these filthy water sources, and so they created these tunnels that would basically take the water from the mountains straight out into the ocean. And so the water resource was wasted. What had once been the lifeblood of the city, in fact, runs under the city through these tunnels, and we have 8.8 million litres of water flowing through one of these tunnels in the city on a daily basis. Here's a city which was developed according to its natural resources, and they have been discarded to the extent that we are now having to bring water from the food-growing region, 64 kilometers away. By 2019, there's going to be a shortage of water in Cape Town, and most people in Cape Town are oblivious to the fact that this water resource exists, and exists in abundance. What is required in every part of life. For that reason, it's really important that this water be reclaimed as far as possible, and it is possible. This water belongs to each and every one of us, and it is important that we reconnect with this resource so that we can survive in the future, not only as a city, but also as a community.
So thank you very much. Those were the 4 films that were picked and funded through the partnership this year. And I'd now like to welcome to the stage our 4 panellists and chair for the evening. And we'll move into a discussion about those films. So please do have a think about which your favourite one was, if anything sparked in you, and yeah, we'd love to open it out to you guys as well. Thank you, Mark.
So whilst we're miking everyone up, think about your personal favourite film. Turn convention on its head and come to the audience first. Okay, before we come to the audience, let me say a few words of introduction. I'm Mark Galloway. I'm the director of the International Broadcasting Trust. I'm a former journalist and filmmaker, and I've been a commissioning editor at Channel 4. But in my present job, I'm very interested in how the media can be used to engage audiences with stories from the developing world. So our panel, we have a very impressive panel tonight. First of all, on my right is Menka Sangvi, who works at the Humanitarian Innovation Fund, which is an independent fund that funds innovators around the world, and her particular focus is on water-related issues. So we have two panelists who come from the development sector and two who come from the media side. Next is Sarah Mosses, who runs a company called Together Films, which works with filmmakers, documentary filmmakers, to help them achieve impact. So she has a particular interest in the social impact of documentary. Next is Bethlehem Mengistu, who's come from Ethiopia to take part in this discussion. Hopefully you're not too jet-lagged. Bethlehem works for WaterAid. She's based in Ethiopia and she works across the region of East Africa. And she has previous experience at other international NGOs. And finally, Alok Jha, who is a journalist at ITN. He's the science editor at ITV News. He's been there for 18 months. He's the successor to Lawrence McGinty. And Alok has written a book about water, which is well worth reading, and he previously worked for The Guardian. So, I mean, water is a huge issue. It's interesting and complex and important. I think it's worth saying that in global terms, we've made a lot of progress in giving people access to water, but there's still 650 million people around the world who don't have access to clean water, and clearly that has a huge impact on their lives. So our aim this evening is to explore how people working in the media can be more effective at telling stories about water to engage audiences. And we'll also explore what the point of engaging audiences is, what we hope to achieve. WaterAid has its view, it lobbies to put pressure on and influence those policy changes. Water is something that we're very familiar with, but I was talking to Bethlehem earlier and she said to me, from Ethiopia, if you're sitting in Ethiopia, there's a huge water crisis. This is an urgent problem, but journalists find it hard to tackle a familiar issue, so they're looking to try and find out, well, what's new? And I think what's been interesting about these 4 films is they all, in their own way, have tried to tell us a new story that we're not familiar with. Three of the films focused on innovation, and we'll hear a bit more about why innovation is interesting and important, and whether or not the media has covered that effectively. But before we start, and before we come to the audience, can we just get a sense of who is in the audience? So can you put your hands up if you're a journalist or filmmaker? Okay, maybe a quarter. Can you say, if you're a journalist, who you're a journalist with or for? Does anyone want to shout out?
Freelance cinematographer.
Documentary freelance photographer. Okay. Who in the audience comes from, roughly speaking, the NGO or development sector? Okay, a little bit more, maybe a third. And the rest? General public?
Interested.
Teacher. Education. Lecturer. Engineer. Okay. Excellent. All right. So I said I'd come to the audience first, if I'm allowed to. So just pick one film which was your favourite and say why. And what we're trying to get at here is what actually does engage an audience, and what works for you. So just very short answers. Let's start in this area. Just, you better say who you are, because we might find that the water experts like different films from the filmmakers or journalists, or the NGO people may surprise us. So you're from?
I work in documentaries for TV.
Yeah.
My favourite was Blanketed Snow, because it just seems like a very quirky, maybe simple idea that would never work, but actually it's just something I didn't know, I guess.
Okay.
Maybe other people do.
Anyone else? Just quick responses here.
Yeah, Nicholas Watts, Institute of Commonwealth Studies. I like the last one. I love Ansel Adams, but I think it was addressing colonial history and ignorance both then and now.
Okay. Anyone else at this side? Here, along here, Julianne.
Tony Lai, independent film producer. I love the ATM, the simple technique of sticking a camera in front of that and then seeing what the reaction was. But the sort of reveal was that it's costing money, and so people aren't going to waste that resource. But the profits are ploughed back into the resource. I thought it was very simple, very effective, and engaging.
Okay, anyone else on this side? Someone at the right at the back, yeah.
Yeah, my name's Avi Janogli from Gabi H2O. We innovate with regard to product for water, but we also believe in education, so it's product and program. We believe that you have to have both components. And I agree with the gentleman who just said it. I love the ATM because you're actually transforming water into a currency. You're giving over the opinion that it's a value. It's a natural resource, but it's a value. It has value. And that's something that I think is very important for all of us, because there's an actual global water crisis on our own doorstep. We've had 12 droughts within the last 22 years in the UK. 39 states are currently in water stressed in the United States. So it affects us all. It's not just the developing world.
Okay. Anyone in the back on the other side? Anyone on this side?
Yeah, Rodrigo from Exego Solar. I really liked the Hoist because it shed light on small-scale water production, and they're currently omitted by the UK utility sector. There's huge issues around innovation, and its innovation space is quite closed. So we need to look at more small-scale solutions to the global water crisis and funding for that.
Okay, at the back, Julian. Anyone else in this?
Thank you. Margaret Batty from WaterAid. I loved all four, but they all really irritated me because I felt that they blamed technology. They looked at technology for a solution. They blamed climate change, looked to put a plaster over climate change solution. They blamed anyone but the politics of water. So I just felt the politics of water wasn't coming through. It showed human resilience, human stoicism. We need to look at the politics, why. And actually the commentator there who talked about colonialism and the Cape Town film, that started to dig at some of those. What are the systemic problems and changes that we need to look at? And are they technologies which are really appealing? The silver bullet is really appealing, but it made me frustrated.
Okay, well, I'll put that to the panelists later. Anyone else from the audience? Yeah, here. Sorry, this is a bit slow, but it's really interesting that people like different films.
Hi, Al Megji from MWH. I really like the place of Sweet Waters because I think that's that hidden resource. I mean, it's kind of all throughout the developed world. The water resources are buried quite often, and no one really understands how it works or how it comes to their house or goes away. So I think making it more, like she said, bringing it up to the surface would be a lot better for people to realise what they're using, how much they're using. And I think that's both in this world and in countries that are developing their water resources right now. I think that's something that's really important. Kind of education pieces around water use and water resources.
Thanks. Okay, I won't come to the audience for a little while now, so you can all relax. So, Menka, which was your favourite and why?
Well, so I guess I'm going to jump into the innovation side of things. I find that in the innovation space, media is...
Just start by telling us what your favourite film was.
the one that wasn't about innovation.
Oh, okay.
It was the Sweet Waters, Cape Town.
And why?
I just found it was really, it was beautiful, and the way it was filmed was beautiful, but I loved that it focused on exploring the problem. It's like a invitation and opening an opportunity for people to get involved.
Yeah. So this kind of references what Margaret was saying, that maybe filmmakers like stories, but people in the development sector are frustrated if it's just stories without context.
Yeah, so there's a tendency, I guess, to tell stories about innovation, about success, and about new technologies or ideas that might solve the problem, because obviously everyone loves a silver bullet. But stories about problems are much harder to tell. And usually, well, often they're quite depressing as well. Like, oh God, we're all gonna die. And to tell a story about a problem in an inspiring way is very difficult. So I think that's what appealed to me about that.
Okay, Sarah?
So I think my favourite one was the Hoist, for a number of reasons. It was looking at localised solutions. She was an engineer at 19. It was a female-led story of innovation in that region, which is empowering to see. She designed the entire thing herself, and you could actually see her going through those processes. And it reminded me of a project called Solar Grannies. Don't know if you've ever heard of that project. So Solar Grannies is a project, I was just Googling it when the credits were going up, but started in 1989. They've trained 700 illiterate women across India and other regions to build solar panels. So these are women who are grandmothers in their villages, have absolutely zero engineering skills. There was a great film. And there was a film about them. Storyville. Yeah, and I think it echoes the idea that I could see kind of taking her drawings and making them into more of a visual kind of online piece, and actually kind of disseminating her actual designs with the film. And you can imagine then another young woman who's 19 in another village saying, actually, well, I've got a scrapyard and I can see her designs and I can make this work. And actually then there's a practical solution embedded within the narrative of the film. You can see her making it, and you can also disseminate that with the film in addition to this. So I think it has like a practical step built in the narrative. You could see like the scientists, the geotech blankets, there's a solution there, but what the hell's a geotech blanket like for a normal person? Where do I get that? How much is it going to cost? Whereas as a person living in a localised setting, okay, what bits do I need to find from the scrapyard? I can go and get them and use them. So I think that one for me had a practical application, but also showed empowered kind of female engineering, which you don't see enough of kind of
in terms of social impact?
Well, that one I can see very practical uses. The other one that I think for me was the place of sweet water, because there you're looking at kind of a governmental decision that was in error years before that hasn't been retracted, and actually could you work with the kind of the systemic kind of ideologies of that area to say, well, this is obviously not working anymore. How do we distribute that water now to make it work? And I feel it needed like a one extra beat in the film. It's literally like, okay, to make this happen, we need further investment in kind of where the water's flowing. We need a conversation with the kind of planning team, like what is the actual steps? But that could have a citywide impact, whereas the kind of individual story in the Hoist is very much a local village by village setting, which is different. And also the fact that they already have a well situated. You're not looking at like a drought situation of change. You're looking at a kind of more efficient way of accessing the water that luckily they already have. So it's kind of what's the urgency also within that story of kind of what's needed.
Okay, Bethlehem.
I thought they were all quite good, and I was inspired by the fact that so many people from different walks of life are trying to be part of the solution. And like you said, it's a crisis that we're dealing with 650 million people without access to water. So I think collaboration across various walks of life is very important. I really like that message, but my most favorite one was the Philippines one. And I thought that was quite good because I felt it was so human and so natural. It was almost like a candid camera at times, and it was as if the tap itself was a character, which I really appreciated. And it also looked at the social dynamics around the tap. I thought that really underlined the universality of water. If you notice, there was no narration, and the story kind of told itself, which I thought was quite good. But more importantly, there were subtle messages where there were various actors behind the story. There was the private sector, they're talking about the ATM. There was the community. There was, I think, perhaps the government, because they're saying that the municipality is not going to scale it up. So those three things, the community, the local government, the private sector, those are recipes for sustainability. And the type of work that WaterAid does, that is what we advocate for. It's advocating for communities to have access to water, not just today, but tomorrow and then the day after. So I thought that really neatly captured all those things that were quite important, but easily told as a story.
Alok?
The one I enjoyed the most was the ATM, because it was very peaceful and it kind of felt like I wrote down here, it's like a goggle box of water development. And it really was compelling to watch people interact with something and reflected in a way that we can all completely appreciate. It didn't need anything else to tell you that you didn't see any water until near the end, but you knew exactly what was going on without any hint. You know what it sounds like, you know what it feels like. It's just so visceral in that respect. And the characters were wonderful. But my favorite character was Khadija. She was just a great character. And I know that's not answering your question as to which is my favorite, because I find it difficult because they're all so different. I find that I really enjoyed the first one just because I could have watched that for an hour. And I'm not just saying that, I really could. And you'd have different stories popping up. And I could imagine that being something you would actually watch. Whereas the others, they're nice bits of campaigning, but I'm not sure that they're journalism in their own sense, if you know what I mean. For me, that's what I'm interested in. But I thought that Khadija was such a great character. She has a story, and I found her interesting.
Okay. So if we move on in more general terms, what engages audiences? I mean, Sarah, from your point of view, what are the films that you look out for? I mean, sometimes people are quite skeptical about whether films actually do have an impact. Is there any evidence that they do have an impact?
Yeah, so there's kind of like a spectrum that we look at versus kind of films which are purely kind of fact-based and informational-based, and films which have an empathetic kind of feeling basis to them, and where you kind of sit on your line with your narrative. So the kind of problem sometimes with films that come out of the NGO charity space is they're so focused on the factual statistical information, because a policy team has said, well, our policy for this year is X, so make sure the character says this. and you're like, they would never say that. Like, that's so weird. And when they say it, you're like, oh, stop.
Yes.
Like, I'm so like disengaged because you just said that line, because a 12-year-old in Kenya would never say that. So you have this kind of where the kind of narrative flow is being too directed from the policy side, that it disengages kind of a wider audience. And then you have the kind of the opposite side, where you're focused on character and you're focused on their individual journey, which is what you want for empathy. But sometimes you're not getting enough of the policy points in there, that you're left feeling, well, okay, they were a really nice person, but I have no idea how I could help them or help the situation or improve things. So there needs to be kind of a middle line. And I think the most important factor there is which audiences you're trying to speak to. So if it's a piece which is directed towards kind of policy change, governmental structures, you need to be slightly more on the statistical side, because they're going to want to say, well, actually, well, how much would this cost, and what needs to actually happen, and how many people this is affecting. Whereas in a more kind of mass public awareness side, you need more of that empathy and feeling, and therefore personal character. So the fact that kind of Luke was resonating with the kind of the young woman in the story, it's that hook that's kind of necessary there. But there's been a growing trend in kind of what we call like media impact research over a number of years. So a number of funders who've started coming into this area, people like the Fledgling Fund based out of New York, who are funding kind of what we call an impact campaign around a documentary. This could be an online documentary, a feature, a short, where you're using a piece of media to try and affect some kind of change. And there's been some amazing examples. Has anybody heard of the film Blackfish that came out last year? Yep, every single person. Just to say it in a word, like, what is Blackfish about? Anybody? Whales, yep. And SeaWorld, what's happened to SeaWorld? Share price has just gone like this. So that was a film which the filmmaker didn't conceive it as that. I hadn't worked on this one, it's just had amazing results, but the filmmaker didn't conceive it to have an impact campaign, as some people would kind of say. But I think the latest share price drop was something ludicrous, like 82% drop in their share price, and now they've committed to not having any more orcas in their sea life centres. That's the biggest driver of commercial gain for their organisation, so huge amounts of impact on a film that just wanted to explore like what was happening in those sectors.
Are there any films that you've personally been involved in that have had an impact?
So ones that are interesting, there was a project, I actually spoke about this previously at the Frontline Club, called Ping Pong, which was a quite an interesting example where we took a film about the over 80s World Table Tennis Championships and started a whole healthy active living campaign with old people across the country. And it's an example where, again, the filmmakers did not envision that to be an impact film in any way. They found 8 amazingly, brilliantly hilarious old people and put them in a film, and it made this amazingly caring film. But at the time, there was a huge conversation around what is the impact of having an unactive elderly population in our country. What does that mean for kind of resourcing, funding, pensions, everything, and this kind of strain on society that older people were having, which was a huge rhetoric at the time. And so we use the film to try and encourage more active, healthy living, and working with partners like Age UK and funders who are interested in that space, and use the film to encourage other older people to try sport and try engagement. And throughout that project, I hired like a table tennis expert to run it, because he knew everything about table tennis.
But Age UK didn't fund or commission the film?
No, so it was nothing to do with commissioning. They came in when we were releasing and hosted 200 screenings with their members. And at the end of the campaign, there was upwards of 2,200 screenings just with older people across the UK. And the early kind of evaluation reports that were coming out suggested that about 60% of people took up some kind of activity from watching the film.
So you had a film that clearly had an impact, and then a group of people came on board to distribute the film to target audiences.
Yeah, so we wanted to test it, so we kind of had a two-strain.
Who funded all those screenings?
So we received a grant from the Big Lottery Fund for that project, and so that enabled us to hire a table tennis manager, a project coordinator. We had to buy table tennis equipment from a supplier. who we work with, who they thought their product was for young people. They thought table tennis was like the new fun young thing, which it is. There's like the Bounce Club in Holborn, and there's all these kind of bars where you play table tennis now. But actually, for the demographic we were looking to, table tennis meant playing across a stack of books on your table at home when you were a kid, and it was a nostalgic thing for them. So big lottery fund.
You're giving us two examples of films that had an impact by accident.
Had an impact.
How do you have an impact by planning to have an impact?
It's also like reviewing the content at that time. So I was actually having a call today with a Canadian impact kind of producer, which is a term people are using at the moment, where she watched a film at a film festival at the world premiere and was like, I have to use this film to save homelessness in Canada. And the filmmakers were like, really? Okay, cool. So she's come on that project to kind of help it. But from the conception point of view,
WaterAid hired you and said, Sarah, what's going to work? How can we make a film that will have this impact?
So you've got to start.
Up for that?
I'm actually helping WaterAid on every episode, but it's really about the ask. Like, what do you want people to think of, feel, and do? And this kind of think, feel, do kind of concept is something really useful in kind of media work. So kind of what do you want to think about? What's the actual evidence base that you're kind of starting something from? Please don't get the policy team to write the entire brief for a filmmaker, because it's terrible. Get them to give you the research and the information, but don't let them write the script, because that means it's really bad. The feeling is really important. Like, should we feel empowered? Like, I feel really empowered watching her make a kind of a hydro well. Like, awesome. Like, that's a really empowering feeling. Whereas I feel slightly depressed for Cape Town and South Africa, in that you've lost all your water. That's terrifying. Like, how kind of, what feeling do you want, and then what do you want them to do? And crafting a narrative that will inspire that relationship with those characters, I think, is really key. And that comes down to your audience. The way you craft a story relevant for a policymaker is going to be vastly different to crafting a story that could be used in a junior school to get 12-year-olds to think about, what does it mean if I didn't have the tap in my house? Kind of, it's going to be a very different narrative. So your awareness of audience from the conception is vital. And anytime I'm working with a kind of content creator and I say, who's your audience? And they say, everybody in the entire world. I'm like, that's going to be a terrible film, because you can't make a film which every single person in the entire world will relate to. Even Star Wars, about 2% of the population have watched it, even though it's the biggest film of the year. You need to think about that audience motivation. What are their conceptions about this issue at the start? What do they understand about it? And how are you going to inform them and inspire them through that piece of content, whether that's a 60-second short, whether that's 10 minutes, whether that's a feature, whether it's online. You've got to have that awareness at the start.
Are there any filmmakers in the audience who make social impact documentaries? Or Julianne? Have you tried to make a social impact documentary and failed, or succeed? Because some of the failures as interesting as what works. Do you agree with what Sarah's been saying?
Absolutely. I think that the audience has to be thought of at the start. I work on lots of different types of films, but
Sarah's kind of been saying that these things happen by accident rather than design.
There's a lot of planning. No, I must stress there's a lot of planning that goes into them.
I think the films that you mentioned were more independent film producers and filmmakers who kind of were lucky with their results, but on a shorter scale film, 5 to 10 minutes, I think there has to be a lot of thought that goes into the planning of that film.
So can you give us a specific example of a film that you've made that has succeeded or not succeeded?
I've just worked on a lot of sustainability films for Knorr and promoting how they are changing their policies and how they're working with farmers directly and how they're changing the agricultural. Sorry, I'm quite nervous about speaking in front of the audience.
No, you're being very brave.
Thank you.
Yeah. Just chat away. Don't think too much about what you're saying.
So they're working directly with the farmers, but the way that we went in to go and produce these films was very directly with the farmers and very.
So your target audience
were consumers, to
Yeah.
raise awareness for the consumers of where, I mean, it was advertising in the sense that big companies are trying to be perceived or need to hit a certain sustainability criteria, and the local one, sorry, not local, the audience and.
Okay, was there another filmmaker? Thanks.
Thanks. I don't agree with Sarah.
You don't agree with Sarah?
I don't agree with that. I don't think
Good,
a lot of
let's
these
have a
films are
round.
made by accident. I think a lot of them come
I think
from...
I slightly
Definitely
mischaracterised.
paraphrased there,
It's all right, I know Sarah very well, so...
The
it's
two
not a problem.
examples happen by accident.
I think that a lot of good films, powerful films, campaigning films, come from the anger of the filmmaker. So, as probably the oldest person in this room, there was a film called Kathy Come Home, and it revolutionised the public's attitude towards homelessness, and it promoted the setting up of shelter. Ken Loach didn't, he made that film because he was angry about the situation.
Yeah, and
I suspect
it actually wasn't a documentary.
No,
It was
well,
a
that's my
drama.
point. That's another point, if you like. It can be any sort of film. It can be. The other thing is that End of the Line changed our attitude to sustainable fishing and what supermarkets were letting you buy. I suspect that came from that same sort of passion. So I don't think there's a magic formula about how you make a film. I used to run the community programme unit at the BBC, and I made thousands of programmes with the public. One of the most powerful films we made was with the miners in 1984 about the suspension of civil liberties by the Thatcher government. That came from their passion.
Okay, let's move on. So, Alok, so we talked a bit about documentary. What about your bit of the business? Does television news have social impact?
It's a hard thing for me to say. Of course it probably does, but I mean I don't spend any time trying to work out what it is. I wish I had time to do that, and I think that personally my job, whether it's been writing or filmmaking or whatever it is, has been all about quite fast turnaround. Sometimes I think about things a bit as much as I can beforehand, but things that are happening pretty much contemporaneously. And if we get time to plan something, then great, but it doesn't happen too much. So does television news have an impact? I'm sure it does. But I don't know how many TV news people there are here, or news people generally, but once you do something, you pretty much forget it for the next day. You may have some memory of it the next time you do it. Sorry.
Do you think you're good at covering the water story?
No, and I don't think anyone is, frankly, because it's. What does that mean? It's quite a complex thing to say, covering the water story. I don't think that there is such a beat in any newsroom anywhere, which is the water beat. And frankly, what would you cover? It's everything. And so it's it's a bit amorphous in that respect. I mean, the reason newsrooms are set up in the way they are is because it's about human desires and things that people are interested in. So there might not be a water beat, but there are certainly aspects to the water story which appear in other people's beats. So whether that's the reporting of a drought somewhere, or in my world, talking about climate change or resource management or energy, which is what I do a lot. You don't call it a water story, but they are stories around water. I wish we could do more of them, frankly, and I wish that there was more humanising of it, which is why I liked Khadijah's story, because ultimately I'm after stories about people, always. Always, always, always. And they're the most compelling to watch, the most compelling to read about. Yes, you can go too far in just talking about that person without talking about the issues around it, but that's your job as a journalist to make sure that it doesn't get lost.
Are there any stories there, the films we've watched, that you could see yourself doing for ITV News?
Well, you know, I'd love to do something like the blanketed snows thing, but what I'm curious about there is that I don't think it told you whether it worked or not, which is what I'd love to know.
Yeah,
if it worked,
apparently
then
they're expanding the project.
If it worked, then it's the kind of thing where
you can ask the filmmaker to tell us, and we'll come back to that.
if it, indeed it did work. But I mean, that sounds, it almost sounds ridiculously hubristic and insane, that project. But in a way, even if a part of it worked, I'd be quite interested in covering a story like that. The thing about, for example, the ATM as well, I think there's something beautiful about just the human interactions on that. That's a story I can see myself covering. The tap's eye view of the world, great, I can see that already. So yeah, we struggle to think long term, and I think that's what makes us not cover these long-term issues in the proper way. We're kind of obsessed as news journalists, too much I think, in basically things that explode or politicians talking about themselves, and the stuff in the middle is the rest of life, and we often don't cover it because we think no one's interested. It's harder to make people interested in that stuff, but that's what you have to do as a journalist. You have to earn your audience. It's not about saying, I want to give you this message. It's about saying, what do you find interesting? Let's go to you first, and then take you to somewhere else that you find interesting. I think that it's harder to do that. And news editors, news journalists are often quite obsessed with pizzazz and wow and stuff. And this stuff isn't that pizzazzy and wowy, but fundamentally much more important. People ask me, in my field, I report environment and science, they would say, what do you think is the most important story in the world right now? Well, immediately, obviously, it's things like politics or your EU referendum. Fundamentally, no one will give a shit about that in 5 or 10 years. Fundamentally, the most important story in the world is climate change. But actually, that's also a meaningless thing to say because you can't just cover climate change. You have to find stories within it. And they are things like politics, which is a very interesting part of it, economics. I think we as news journalists have sort of failed to understand it. So far.
Failed to understand climate change?
No, failed to understand that's what the story is.
Okay. So how receptive are your bosses to your way of thinking?
They're getting closer to it. I was at The Guardian for a long time, and the editors there were very much aware of environment as a subject, which covers more than just, let's go to somewhere and show you a polar bear falling into an ocean, or the ice sheets melting and those kinds of things. It wasn't this epic, grand sort of abstract story. It was about individuals, communities, local action. It was about government policies, basically. And they realized that many, many years ago, a good 8 or 9 years ago, and the environment team was built up around those ideas, and still is. And I would say arguably is, in newspaper terms, the best newspaper in the world for that. TV news is much further behind on some of those sorts of things, although ironically it could really take over because the environment is all about pictures ultimately, and pictures about people, and really it could do something special. So it's a bit of a sleeping giant, I think. When I came to ITN 18 months ago, yes, they were interested in climate change, but it was very rooted in the 2005 sort of, let's go and show you shocking things. But then let's then talk about something else for the rest of the bulletin. We turned it around last year to talk about economics and politics and sustainability, and almost didn't mention the terms climate change. Climate change should just be a layer in all of our reporting. What are all the conflicts in the Middle East about? Pretty much, it is fundamentally rooted in access to water, food, all these things that exacerbate political tensions. And that's where the stories come from. And we, news journalists, tend to go somewhere, say, look, this has happened, and then go away again. And some great ones will stay there for a long time, of course, but not many of them will not try and understand what causes that problem. And fundamentally, it is things like access to resource, the secreting away of resources to different places, politics. And we're obsessed with the symptoms rather than causes, and I think we need to move into that.
Do you share the comment that we had from the audience, from Margaret from WaterAid, who is frustrated about the lack of context, the politics of water, and things that are systemic?
Fundamentally, yes, but I'm not going to blame these films for not tackling that. They're 5-minute films. What can they do?
Yeah.
So I don't have a problem with that. You can only tell a very short, crisp story in that time. I'd rather they did that than try and cover everything. Yes, there were hints at some politics in the ATM and Place of Sweet Waters. But yeah, I do share that frustration, actually, that we can't make other journalists, news editors interested in these things until there's a crisis. And, you know, we could get ahead of that crisis, actually, if we're brave and forceful enough. And I think partly it's to do with the kinds of people in newsrooms. The ones who are most respected are political journalists, and they are war correspondents, who are great people, I'm sure, but they're not reporting this stuff, really. I think that once you have environment reporters like John Vidal and others doing these amazing things, someone mentioned End of the Line. I mean, that was Charles Clover's film from the Telegraph. Well, he worked as the Telegraph, environment correspondent for a long time. You know, when you have people of that stature saying, look, you guys need to focus on this thing here, that's when we know we succeeded on this.
So Bethlehem, from your perspective living and working in Ethiopia, what sort of films or media do you think would engage the audience in Ethiopia? Do you agree with some of the things that have been said or disagree?
I do agree with a lot of the things previous speakers mentioned. One thing that I agree with, I think that runs across as a thread, is translating the technical concepts into something that is very simple and maybe, you know, a 5-year-old could understand. That can go a long way. I do appreciate that. And I think a key technique there is to leave the audience with a sense of urgency, and I think that's also another key thing. But one thing that we are challenged with, well, in a country like Ethiopia and also other Eastern African countries, is the consistency of coverage. Usually an issue linked to water and sanitation is likely to be bumped off for an issue linked to elections or any other political issue. So ensuring that water and sanitation gets political prioritization is a constant struggle that we're working with, because a lot of the decisions are made in the editorial rooms. And we do try to invest in journalists so that there's a higher level of appreciation for the cross-cutting nature of water, sanitation, and hygiene, not just for the water sector, but for education and health.
So are journalists generally not very well informed about water?
They are informed to an extent, but they don't view it as newsworthy. Other issues are considered newsworthy. For instance, an issue that's bound to gain front page coverage linked to water would be about hydropower, not drinking water supply, or infrastructure, which has a lot to do with water, but it's about the bigger economic issues. And those are the issues that have a political undertone about the performance of the government or the drive for middle income status, and things like that. So it's not a political priority. It's seen as an issue that is maintained within the household. So to nurture this issue to be brought out into the public and be seen as a political issue is something that we're continually trying to work at, and also invest in key journalists so that we have advocates within journalists as well.
And what are the sort of stories or messages that you think journalists should be covering in Ethiopia?
The human stories are the best because they are relatable. They surpass the barrier of language, because, for instance, a country like Ethiopia is quite diverse. It's hundreds of languages are spoken in Ethiopia. But making it about a person and giving it a human face that translates across any language barrier or any geographical divisions. So we would invest in having journalists visit our project sites, for instance, so that they're able to see the impact on the ground. And we've had different forums where they shared expertise and things like that. So we have found that to be quite impactful, making it about the person and telling the story from the lens of a person.
And how serious is the water issue in Ethiopia?
It's quite serious.
How many people have access to clean water?
About 58% of the total population have access to clean, safe water. The total population of Ethiopia is about 99 million. It may have gone up since I've been here, but last I checked it was 99 million.
40 million.
Exactly,
roughly,
yeah. But it's not to discount that we've come a long way. Over the past 10 years, a lot more people have gained access, but still there's a lot more work to be done.
What's the gap that you've achieved in 10 years? What was it at the beginning?
In the beginning, it was less than 50% of the population had access. We are now at a point where more than 50% of the population has access. So that's a dramatic increase. But the case for sanitation is more grim.
So at that rate, it will take 40 years for everyone.
Yes, it's going to take us a very long time. And we need some creative solutions, and we need collaboration across various sectors.
So what would a creative solution look like? What do you mean?
Well, for instance, one thing that comes to my mind, and after watching these films, is nurturing the role of the private sector. I think is something that we have to really make space for in the future, because it's gotten to a point where the demand has surpassed the supply, and governments are genuinely overwhelmed at times. And our population is dramatically increasing and is changing from a rural population to an urban population. So even the problem is mutating into something very new. So we need non-traditional actors. We need scientists like the ones from Armenia, and we think the private sector, like the reference to the Philippines film as well. So collaboration from non-traditional actors is something very key for new solutions.
Joe, you've been monitoring Twitter, talking to the filmmakers.
Hello? Yes, okay. You were asking at the start favourites, there was just a couple of responses on that. So Sven, who is in South Africa, gives his vote to Blanketed Snows. He describes it as fascinating ingenuity. So yeah, that was him. And there was one more comment. I think there was a lot of love for the ATM machine generally online, so that seems to be the most popular one. Yes, there was also a comment from a chap called George, who said, "Wow, who would have thought you could create artificial glaciers through insulating snow with blankets?" ? So I think it was that kind of wow factor, wasn't it?
And someone in the audience said, "Does it actually work?"
Yes, I've sent that question to the filmmaker, and they've not yet got back to me, so I'll let you know when they do.
Okay. Thanks, Joe. So, Menka, how well do you think journalists and filmmakers are covering the water story?
I think that that it's a very, very complex problem, and I really resonated a lot with what Alok said about it being treated as a standalone subject compared to integrated into some of the stories that we're naturally interested in, for example, around politics. And treating it as a separate subject, I think, comes at a cost. It becomes siloed as a kind of environmental issue, which clearly it's very much a human issue, cutting across all aspects of culture and politics and economics. So I think that in a way it's a little simplified, the way that it's communicated.
So what are the kind of stories that you'd like to see filmmakers focusing on?
When it comes to innovation is only ever going to be as good as the people that are involved in it. And I think that different problems naturally invite or attract certain types of innovators. And a technological problem will attract techies, and a social problem will attract social scientists or artists. And I think that a lot of, going back to what I was saying earlier about problem framing, and I really like that today's event was called Framing the Future of Water, because I think that the framing aspect is really where the journalist can add huge value. I think it's really exciting. So just to continue on the theme of water, for example, if it's framed as there's enough water, but it's polluted with plastic, or there's enough water but it's polluted with human feces, because actually 1 in 3 people around the world don't have access to toilets, and the link there. So it changes the dynamics, or that there's enough water, there's oceans of it, but it's full of salt and we don't have a cheap way of desalinating it. So I think that the framing of each of those really will connect with different people. And so, you know, I recently read a report about water treatment in Mozambique, where it was quite sad actually, where the water treatment sachets that were given out in a humanitarian context, a lot of people didn't know what they were, and they thought that they might be oral rehydrate sachets. And some people thought they were flour and for cooking, and there was a confusion around it. And it just seemed really sad that there was this aspect of it which is to do with you know, communicating beyond language, maybe having some kind of visual explanation. I mean, even someone like myself, I really benefit from the way IKEA, for example, you know, shows me how to unpack something. My husband's in the audience, so I should probably not attest to too much skill in this department, but it really makes a difference. And I imagine that they probably hire, you know, behavioral psychologists and all kinds of expertise around this to really communicate. And I don't think that water innovators or development sector maybe puts enough emphasis on these kind of human aspects. I met another person from Uganda recently who was telling me about how he knows, or he feels that he can tell if the water is clean once he makes a cup of tea. and you know, he from experience, he was an old person, so he felt that he could really tell. And you know, that's the kind of thing where you don't really think about the taste or the smell of water. If you put too much chlorine into it, then are you going to turn people off, and they might go to less safe sources of water? Those kind of aspects, I feel that they're not areas where innovation is happening as much as maybe the techie side of it. And I think that's partly because of the way the whole problem is communicated in the media.
Can you give us an example of a project that you're involved in that you think would benefit from media coverage? I mean, how could the media make the work that you do more effective?
Well, I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think a lot of it is a kind of a call to action for all kinds of people from all walks of life to get involved. It's about participating and empowering. There was a thing about empowerment which bothered me a little bit with the Syrian, the Hoist example with Khadija, where I loved that she's an innovator. I loved that she called herself an innovator. I'm 19, I'm an innovator, and I made this thing, and it's great, and it really made me happy to see it. But at the same time, I don't know if that's the kind of empowerment we would want for ourselves. Like, would we want to be empowered to clean our own water, or you know, would we want to be empowered to be able to find a solution to be able to clean our own water? And there's a kind of a is a feel-good thing, but also are we avoiding some of the harder questions around the politics? So I think that what the media could really do is, and it's easy for me to say because I'm not a media person, I don't know how they do it, but to really get into some of the more subtle root causes behind why some people have this problem and why others don't, basically.
Okay, let's come to the audience now. Yeah, just questions, comments.
Thank you. Remy Coe from WaterAid. I have a challenge for you and for the filmmakers and journalists. We've heard how hard it is to talk about water in the news, and we've also heard from Menka about that 1 in 3 people in the world don't have toilets. Now, that's what's making water dirty in the first place. And also, that's remained stable, actually, for the past 25 years, because it's not a political priority, because we don't talk about it. Now, if it's hard to talk about water, how hard can it be to talk about toilets? The lovely sound of the water from the ATM wouldn't be as lovely if the camera was, you know. But seriously, how do we talk about issues that don't go well on film, like defecation, like menstruation, like other unmentionable that make people life hell in the world. So.
Okay, thanks. We'll have a few. Any more? Anyone in the back? All right, one here and then one here.
Hi, Mandy Senarathna from MWH Global. So I've got one question and one kind of comment. With regards to your earlier comment about do we want to be inspired to clean our own water, from the technical aspects, definitely, because we just don't have enough people going into engineering and science. And the second part of it is not only do we have a lack of people coming into the industry, we don't have the right media support in the UK about the UK water industry, so it's kind of a double-edged sword. Not enough people going into it, lots of people retiring, and actually we're talking about problems in the rest of the world and not being able to get the message out. All of us here from the water industry would say actually we have the same problems here in the UK. General public not having any real idea of what the industry does, where the gaps are, and actually how they could make it better.
How would things be better if the general public was well informed? What's the actual tangible difference that would make?
Well, we spend a lot of time taking fatbergs out of the streets, and that's just basically from people putting oil down the drain. A lot of other mentionables, but if we were to take out that time, we go and do those things, we would actually have a lot more time to fix a whole lot of the leaks that are out there, which people think, oh, it's been leaking for days. It's like, we've got this thing called the economic level of leakage. It's like, actually, we're better off fixing this other leak than this leak. But it doesn't look good, and unfortunately the media only
So how much water's been leaked in the UK?
35% in London.
35%.
Keeping in mind we've got the world's oldest water system, and for us to kind of fix a leak on, say, I don't know, right here, we'd need at least a lead time of 12 weeks to get permission from X, Y, and Z, and to talk to the we've got, it's about 300 meters to fix 1 meter of pipe right now, and that's after we've designed everything, and that's and a 12-week lead time for us to work in London.
So you said you had 2 points. What's the second?
I think the first was lack of, I think, support from the media and us not communicating with the media properly on what we want. And the second one is definitely needing inspiration. My favourite one was actually a blanket of snow, because it was a simple, innovative solution to maybe having more water in the future. So yeah, double-edged sword for us.
I've got a question.
You're also from the water
Oh yeah,
industry.
sorry, I'm from MBH as well, so I'm in water.
It's nice to
engineering as
see
well.
a human face to the water industry. You look much nicer than I imagined you'd look.
No, mine's more towards like journalism in general, because I'm new to the whole thing. But do you find it difficult? Because in my experience, it's easy to encapsulate people in short-term goals. Do you actually find that it's harder to release documentaries and things like that, which will keep people attached to it long term?
Okay, thanks. Then we had a question here.
Nicholas Watts, Institute of Commonwealth Studies again. I was fascinated in seeing 4 impressive and engaging 5-minute films. I'm wondering if you could comment on what is missing, what is lost if you have a 5-minute as opposed to a 10 or a 20-minute TED links or a YouTube or whatever. Is there something magical in terms of audience research, attention spans? Does the 5-minute film work better getting to a broader audience? Those sorts of questions would interest me. Thanks.
Okay.
One question. I'm Jody Gadik, PhD in innovation design. So my question is related to blanketed snows. It wasn't my favorite, but I had this question, basically the value of failure, or because we mentioned we questioned whether it worked or not, and I would be interested in whether just showing the struggle, or that how much actually takes innovation and how many times we actually fail before we succeed first, and showing that whether that has a value in it actually.
Okay. Yeah. To that. Well, I'll give these questions to members of the panel. We won't get you to answer all the questions. Just give you one each. Yeah, go.
I've just got a few comments. One of them is regarding interesting media stories and relating it to politics and economics. And I think what's quite interesting right now, what's happening is with TIP, which is a new transatlantic trade policy that's happening. And if you look at the historical implications of some of those policies that's happened and affecting Detroit, is a really interesting example of how politics is involved in water and the value of water. Because a lot of people there who, basic communities that have been left in Detroit from the very affluent car industry are now very poor people who can't pay their bills and are getting water cut off. And there is a lot of stories about that, and that's not highlighted in the media, and that's about water. So I think that's quite an interesting story, and that's a lot of politics in there and empathy as well, because that's happening in a country which we called as a developed country. And another point I want to make, I don't know, I would say I don't really support our capitalist system. So the idea of using the private sector doesn't resonate well with me at all. And I think what's interesting to see as what's happening now and how it's evolving as the energy sector in Germany, how it's been taken back and it's actually run by communities. And that's also happening here with fracking as well. And that brings on also how water is used in energy and how it's used, not misused, let's say, because a lot of water sources get polluted as well through that, and a waste of water, I would say, when you could use renewables. There are a few of my comments, and there's a lot more to go on, but I'll stop now.
Someone else, and then we'll come to the panel.
Hi, just a very quick question.
Just say
I
who you
really
are.
enjoyed the whole event, and it's very interesting to raise this kind of awareness here. But I wonder if people in those local places like the Philippines or Sierra Leone also have access to these videos. If this is done locally over there as well.
Well, let's take that. Do you want to answer? Just start again. I think we missed that. So, Public Media Alliance is a network of broadcasters around the world.
That's right.
And
we're promoting from tomorrow, when WaterAid launches well online, that all our members can have access to these films for free. So, and also the filmmakers will be promoting them, and they've taken them back to the areas where they filmed to show them as well. So yeah, they will have wide global audiences.
Thank you. Okay, so Alok, we had the water industry saying that the media isn't good at covering the story in the UK, and extraordinary statistics, 35% of water being lost in London. Presumably that would be a good story for you.
I actually think those stories have been covered lots of times. There have been large documentaries about the fatbergs and all of those sorts of things. And in a sense, they're kinds of stories which make people turn around and actually examine a subject for a while. Certainly how it did with me. I know one of my colleagues at the BBC dived into one of these sewers in London, actually, and dug out helped one of your colleagues to dig out one of these things, and it was an incredible story. So I feel like that is actually a familiar story. Perhaps it's not done enough, but then it has to change. Something has to change, which I think is a bit of a difficult thing. And the point of news is it has to be new. And look, I'm not defending the fact that people don't find this stuff interesting and everything, but I think that simply there being an issue without an obvious solution is difficult for journalists. And if I can be slightly argumentative, it's not our job to support anybody. As journalists, we're there to just find things out that we find interesting, and then tell people about it. Now, in that process, some journalists have higher ambitions and want to change things or raise awareness. But you must never go into a conversation with a journalist thinking it's your job to do this because of X, because it just certainly puts me off. And I love the water stories. So you know, you should never think about something as support. Now, if you've got a story, that's the way to do it. So look, these fatbergs, for example, the way that I saw that covered, are causing X problem, Y problem, and it's costing you money, so we need to all do something about it. More than a third of the London's water is disappearing down cracked pipes, and actually, instead, our politicians are talking about X, Y, Z, and there's a very simple solution to this, or this is what you need to do about it. That's okay. If there's some sort of action, some sort of thing happening, then we become interested in the story. And the second thing you say is, this is a really important issue. You can't start with this is a really important issue thing. I think if I was to give anyone any media advice about anything, which I shouldn't because I'm certainly not an expert, but that's what I say to scientists all the time when they say to me, really important subject thing I've just done here. It's like, I don't care. What does it actually mean to anybody? And I love science. I think it's great. I love these sorts of subjects. But you can't start with, we need the support, or you must do this. Journalists don't have any mandate like that, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, thanks. So, Sarah, we had a question here about the length. Do different lengths have different impacts?
I'm going to start it with a more general point on all the questions, kind of, because I think it's really important. So, firstly, like, water is such a vast area, and I think it's really important to kind of like stress this out. Like Fatberg is a great example. Every single person I know in London talked about Fatberg when that happened, and they couldn't give a shit about anything about world politics, global human rights, anything. But Fatberg was interesting for like a week. Someone like proposed down there, someone had a dinner down there. Like there was these mental stories that came out, and suddenly it was a thing that got people interested. But water is a vast subject, and not every part of water will be interesting to every single audience. Again, it comes back to an audience position. Who are you trying to talk to about this particular section of water? Fatberg appealed to everybody because it had a funny name, the pictures look horrible, you could like go and have a look at it if you wanted to. Like there was a way of hooking that into a media story that made it engaging for any person of London could find that interesting. But trying to talk to them about an Ethiopian drought crisis for a country that they maybe don't even know where it is, let alone what the problem is.
The Fatberg is a story that can be told in a minute and a half or...
Oh yeah, for sure. But it can be covered in a variety of ways. So that was covered in GIFs on Facebook.
Systemic story needs more time.
To really uncover a kind of a systematic change, I think you need a length of time to get through that, because you need the length of time to explain what is the kind of critical analysis of the position you're at the moment, what is the potential solution that can be involved, and what does the result look like. And that does normally require a more lengthy process, because you also need to understand the agents involved. So it's quite hard to summarise kind of various government departments, kind of private companies who are involved, the effect on the local population in a very short 2-minute piece to really understand all of the players that are there. And then again, it comes down to a conversation about kind of will these be seen locally, to try and get potentially a local village in a certain kind of country to sit down together and watch a 90-minute film probably won't be able to happen. To have a short piece of content that's 3 minutes on a mobile phone, because now there's so much more mobile connectivity, especially across Africa, you could have something quite compelling in 3 minutes, which is made specifically for the local audience need, but then you have a longer version which is made for when you're speaking to the government heads. So for me, length is about audience. So there's numerous studies about the engagement levels online and how long people watch stuff, and again this issue about free access as well. So just putting it on YouTube just because it's 3 minutes long does not guarantee you any views whatsoever. There needs to be a driver of action to get there, but there also needs to be a look at kind of what you're giving them, especially the first 30 seconds of that content. The first 30 seconds is crucial, because people will just click off, especially if it's something in a Facebook feed. Now that you have Facebook auto-playing videos, it will auto-play. So some people count that as a play because it automatically started on your scroll, whereas other platforms and campaigns will say, no, until they've watched 60 seconds of it, we're not going to class that as a view, because they haven't actually engaged in that piece of content. So the length question has to be related to audience, but also the audience question has to be related to the issue at hand. Fatberg works for wide London engagement and wide national engagement. People in Ethiopia would not find that funny, because at least you have water. So like, why are you arguing about Fatberg happening?
So Menka, we had a question about the value of failure.
Right, yes. The value of failure in innovation is it's just really core. And we talk a lot about risk-taking in innovation, which means that if in our portfolio, so at the moment we've funded 65 projects over the last 5 years, and a lot of them are at the point where they've developed an idea, they've tested it out, and they now have a sense of whether it's working or not. And if we don't have anything in our portfolio that hasn't worked, that means that we've not really behaved as an innovation fund. We've taken too many safe bets, and we haven't really invested in something that may or may not work. So that's really important. And we asked two questions. you mentioned specifically the blanketed snow as an example of did it work, did it not work? And I had the same question about the other, the ATM and the hoist as well. Because, I guess with the ATM, I imagine that there's issues around repair and maintenance, and I'm starting to think about 3D printing and whether that might help. And it's just the so what question. So normally when I talk to an innovator, they're at the point of having identified something, so they know the answer to what. And then we go into the so what. And so, so that's great, it's worked in this context. Will it work in a different context? Can it be scaled? Can it be replicated? Or which bits of it can be replicated and which bits of it will have to change? And sometimes the entrepreneur has to be replaced by a very different personality as well for that process to happen. So I think that that's a really interesting transition that happens between an exciting idea to an actual innovation that's making an impact.
Okay, and Bethlehem, so we had one question about the private sector. Does WaterAid work with the private sector? Do you think we're over-enamored by the private sector?
We do work with the private sector, but in terms of having a partnership to come up with an effective innovation that could potentially be utilized to ensure more access to populations is something that we are, I guess, it's work in progress. Part of the reason that I really like the Philippines film is because we actually have done a similar piece of work in Uganda with prepaid meters with our local partner. So that's a tested example that we had invested through a partner in ensuring that a slum area, a community living within a slum area has gained access. And it's low cost, it's pro-poor, it's accessible, and easily maintained by the community, local government, and also the private sector. So we have such examples where we are going into a collaborative partnership with the private sector, but I think there's space to do more.
Okay, thank you. Well, we have to wind up. Unfortunately, I didn't get to the question about toilets and defecation. So I'll leave that hanging in the air. Maybe it's easier to answer that after a couple of beers.
Can I give a really quick response to that?
Yeah, I was also going to give it a crack,
if we don't talk about it, we're not going to improve it.
But also,
okay, so talk to Menka. She has lots of money
don't talk to me.
to spend on.
But we do have
about it a lot. But yeah, as a general public, we need to talk about poo more.
So please join me in thanking the panel and you, the audience.